Uh, okay, everybody. My apologies for the delay there. We are recording. It wasn't possible to connect to the live broadcast, but we're recording at least. So, as I mentioned earlier, it will be capable of repeated viewing later on. Mr. Finlay, then, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, sir. So, my next witness is Mark Fitzpatrick, whose details appear from his report and recognition, and there is a brief CV at Appendix 1 of his inquiry statement. I was going to ask Mr. Fitzpatrick to start by reading two sections of his recognition and then the conclusions. So, beginning, Mr. Fitzpatrick, with paragraph 6 under citing design and layout.
So from paragraph 6, paragraphs 10.77 to 10.85 of my report of handling discuss the siting, design and layout of the amended proposal, but that's discounting the removal of turbine 19. That the designers had to navigate and negotiate various technical constraints was acknowledged in both the original and my most recent report of handling. While renewable energy development has been accepted in the receiving landscape character type 135, which is the Rounded Hills, Caithness and Sutherland landscape character area, there remains challenges in developing a wind farm in the proposed location, and those I've set out as being coherently integrating the scheme with both leg wind farms, the higher ground levels across the site relative to leg 2 wind farm, the comparatively small scale of the rounded hills, including the shallowness of the dips between summits across the proposal site relative to other landscape character areas of the same landscape character type, that's the rounded hills of Caithness and Sutherland, and also impacts on landscape designations in the wider area. The removal of 12 turbines, which is now 13, and the relocation of turbine 17 is the mitigation offered by the applicant. Paragraph 10.84 of the report of handling sets out that this reduced scheme has generally ameliorated the worst of the initial proposal's excesses. However, the proposal remains for a large-scale array in comparison to both leg schemes, is sited on higher ground than leg 2 and over and around 3 summits, and this offers less visual containment than the landform provides for the adjacent leg 2. So while my concern regards impacts on the Dornet Firth National Scenic Area, particularly as experienced at the section of the B9176, including the point of entry to the National Scenic Area and the Struy viewpoint, it is my opinion that the significant visual effects not forming part of Highland Council's objection are still relevant to the assessment, as the impact from the development should be understood in its entirety, and that so impacts on the National Scenic Area are seen in proper context. Okay. So with regard to the proposal scheme's interaction with leg 2, my conclusion is that the revision has produced an improved in combination compositional visual outcome, i.e. where Gavary interacts with leg 2 to produce a more rationally legible single array, even though it does increase the horizontal spread. And it's done this at viewpoints 4, that's at the A39 between Leg and Rose Hall, and viewpoint 15, Carn, Koenig. And it's only that effect is only produced at those 2 viewpoints. I have agreed with the applicant's assessment of not significant visual impacts at both of these viewpoints. I've also agreed with the applicant's assessment of significant visual effects at viewpoint 6. That's from Ord Hill, which is above Leg. Viewpoint 7, which is at Leg Cemetery, and that overlooks Leg towards the application site. And viewpoint 11, Achnairn. I also consider the visual effect at viewpoint 13, that's along the A836 Rian Bridge, also to be significant, and that's contrary to the applicant's judgment. My judgment is that Gavary interacts with leg 2 in a manner that increases the density of the combined array, and therefore overall visual clutter and incidences of stacking, thus changing the character of leg 2 to its detriment. I consider these significant effects on key locations and routes to be adverse.
Sorry, I might miss something. If I can pause there. The issue was raised yesterday about...
Could you pop your mic on, please?
My apologies. I can ask you to pause there. The issue was raised yesterday about whether leg 2 had been commenced or not. Perhaps you could update the report on your understanding.
Apologies for the confusion. Leg 2 is currently undergoing the satisfaction of conditions process, so they haven't started on site just yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If you can continue reading at paragraph 12.
So it is noted that the mitigation secured for leg 2 included the removal of the 4 easternmost turbines, and those are turbines 10, 11, 12 and 13 of that project, which the easternmost turbines of Gavary align with. These turbines were removed to reduce the horizontal spread of the array and remove turbines from higher ground to ensure the appearance of more consistent hub and tip heights. When viewed from the Strury viewpoint, this mitigation resulted in an improved visual cohesiveness and composition, with turbines being screened by the horizon and perceived to be within their own landscape setting. Highland Council takes the view that the new wind farm developments should not unduly undo the mitigation secured by approved schemes. I would add as well that the hub heights of leg 2 were also, on some of the turbines, were lowered, and that would mean that aviation lighting wouldn't be viewed from the Strury viewpoint as well. Continue to 13.
No, so I'm grateful. CD 1305, Roman numeral 1, just placed, is the design evolution chapter, which I'm not going to ask you to go to in detail, but it bears out what you've just said. If one turns to CD 1305 little 2, that sets out the original proposed layout of the wind farm. And if we concentrate at the moment on the turbines to the right-hand or eastern side, one can see to the north and slightly northwest of the loch, 10 turbines 10, 11, 12 and 13. And in 2 iterations, which are, if one turns to CD 1305 little 3, turbines 10 and 12 are removed, and then if you turn to turbine to CD 1305 little 4, turbines 11 and 13 are removed, and that's all as described in the design evolution chapter. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I don't think we need to look at CD 1305.5. A detailed juxtaposition of the layout can actually be found on CD 12. So that's one of the applicant's figures, CD 12.7 little 2, which is in fact a noise information map, but it shows the current juxtaposition in a reasonably high level of detail.
Correct.
What was the concern of Highland Council in having the turbines 10, 11, 12 and 13? What lay behind the concern in having those removed before it found the scheme to be acceptable?
It was impact from scenic views such as the Strury viewpoint, and it was the sort of spread of the array of 14 turbines. So following their removal, my colleague and my colleagues were satisfied that the impact from the Strury viewpoint in particular would be within acceptable limits. And one of the ways that it did that was to ensure that it was behind a landscape ridge, which meant that only blades, for the most part, would be visible from Struy.
And one can see that in the various visualizations with which we're now familiar. With the potential insertion of Gavary into that position, if some of the turbines in Gavary sit immediately to the south of leg 2, but some of the turbines sit to the east and on higher ground.
Yes.
What is the concern about that in terms of Highland Council's issues?
Okay, well, from Struy viewpoint, that means that they occupy the most elevated position in forward views. Due to the sort of like 3 low summits and the shallow surrounding landform that they're associated with, there's less containment, visual containment of the turbines as would be offered by the lower ground and the sort of topography that one sees associated with leg 2. And we recognise that the landscape character type, the rounded hills, does host large turbines. However, an analysis of the specific landscape character area, and specifically the topography of the site that hosts would host Gavary, it doesn't quite achieve the same sort of scale and as maybe further into the interior or other landscape character areas of that landscape character type.
Thank you. And then if you can read paragraph 13 of your recognition, please.
Certainly. So I do not consider the impact could be properly described as localised, along with impacts on viewpoint 12, which is the Struy viewpoint. I've had regard to the agreed significant visual effects at a community over 10 kilometres away, which would be Achnairn at viewpoint 11. My finding of significance on a national cycle route here, but I do recognise that that has been downgraded, even though it's still a promoted route by Sistrans, as represented by viewpoint 13.
Right. Now, first of all, can I just ask you to take your report, because I want to identify where we find your evidence as to, my apologies, the officer's report, which is CD 4.2, where we find your evidence on visual impact and methodology. Because yesterday, reference was made to your Appendix 2 to that report, which is the visual assessment appraisal. But if you go to the body of the report, you deal with landscape and visual impact methodology at 1086 to 1092, and what may become relevant, I don't know, cumulative matters that...
Sorry, Mr. Finney, I'm not picking you up. Can you start that again?
Yes, you look at...
I think, yes, if both of you, when both of you have your mics on at the same time, then they compete with each other. So perhaps if you can each remember to switch them off and on at the appropriate points, that would be very helpful. My apologies, Mr. Finlay, please continue when you're ready.
Thank you. So you deal with landscape and visual impact assessment methodology at paragraphs 1086 to 1092, and cumulative matters, particularly at 1088. And you do so by reference to AIR Technical Appendix 4.1, which we looked at on many occasions yesterday.
Correct.
Thank you. The report...
Sorry, Mr. Finney. At that moment, I missed the reference you're taking.
It's
The
the officer's report, PD 4.2,
Yep.
and that was paragraphs 1086 to 1092, and the reference to ARR TA 4.1 was at 1088.
Yep.
Then if we go forth to visual impacts, your description of that begins at 10.109 and runs some significant length to 10.138, I believe. You deal with some of the viewpoints in, you have greater description of the impacts, and with reference to paragraph 13 of your precognition, which you've just read, you deal with viewpoint 9 at 10.113, viewpoint 12 at 10.114 and 5, and viewpoint 13 at 10.116, and indeed all three at 10.117 and following, where you deal with the difference in judgment. So, and then just before we leave that part of the report, you come back to cumulative impacts at 10.121 and following. And when the reporter is considering your evidence on that, should he bear those matters in mind as well as the summary in your visual assessment appraisal at Appendix 2? You're nodding.
That's correct, yes.
In Mr. Welsh's evidence, he deals with the disputes between you with regard to viewpoints 9, 11 and, 9, 12 and 13, but he doesn't actually deal with the disputes over the cumulative impact points. So I'm not going to ask you about those. In terms of the issue of whether effects are localised, could you have regard to or open up CD 1, I think it's 117, hang on, let me just check. Yes, with Highland Council's visualisations, and turn to viewpoint, firstly to viewpoint 9. I'm just choosing the 3-point viewpoints where you disagree with Mr. Welsh. The disagreement here is of a more modest nature. You agree that it's a moderate impact. You consider it significant. Mr. Welsh considers it not to be significant. By reference to whichever of the figures you would like to use, perhaps you could, by reference to those figures, explain to the reporter why you consider this effect in this location was significant.
So in my viewpoint assessment in Annex 2 for viewpoint 9, I was thinking about the scale of change in the view, and that this was medium, as in it's a moderate change in the it provides a readily apparent influence due to perceptual width and prominence in front of distant peaks. So that would be a magnitude of change. Whilst using the applicant's methodology set out in the technical appendix, using their matrix, a medium magnitude of change against a medium-high sensitive receptor would produce a moderate effect. and in my opinion, that's significant because the turbines interaction with the sort of skyline in the medium distance, and the sort of how they outcompete with distant peaks. Says here the Phoenix, Benderg and Glencalvie SLA for visual prominence. Also, there's
just pausing there. One turns to the last visualization, which is 35. That shows the peaks that you are comparing.
Yes, it does, yes. And it also just, you get a better sense of the sort of spread of the turbines in the landscape as you experience them in views, which would be views from residential receptors as well.
Grateful, sir. Unless there's anything you want to say about viewpoint 9, can we move on to viewpoint 12, which we've spent quite a lot of time looking at yesterday. Here is perhaps the most significant difference between yourself and Mr. Welsh. Again, by reference potentially to the last visualization, or whichever visualization you find of greatest assistance to make your point, why do you find a significant visual impact at this location?
Again, the 75 millimetre photograph gives you the sense of the actual scale that will be perceived as you're viewing the turbines in forward views from the estuary viewpoint. Whilst there are turbines in the view, they're at some distance currently to the left, and as I've set out in my report, the leg 1 has very little influence in that view. As such, I mean, there's a little bit of terminology here in the it's probably a semantic thing in the methodology as laid out by the applicant, where it's uncharacteristic in the view, which sets a sort of lower tolerance, I think. But I think in forward views, they're uncharacteristic of the view.
Thank you. And lastly, if we move to viewpoint 13, which is Rian Bridge, here at a distance of just over 15 kilometres, and again, by reference to whichever visualization you refer to, can you explain your thinking as to why this location gives rise to a significant impact?
So in terms of the magnitude of change, I consider that there's a moderate alteration to the baseline view, given the distance and presence of leg 1. Leg 1 would mean that turbines are slightly characteristic of the view. The turbines are in forward views, and it's a promoted route. I did note that it's not the national cycle route anymore, so I acknowledge that. I still think it's a high sensitive receptor because it's a promoted route. I was having a look at the matrix that's given to us in the methodology, and if it does come down to a medium-high sensitivity, then the magnitude of change would be medium. This would therefore be a major moderate and significant level of effects still. and given the distance, I couldn't consider that a localised effect, and also just given the exposure of the turbines, where there are, in that view, there would be a high proportion of towers visible, and their relationship with a considerable number of summits and dips, and they're perceptually wide in that view, even if they're occupying a small portion of the field of view.
Grateful. If you could then turn to paragraph 25 and just read your conclusion of your recognition.
So it's my opinion that the development will result in significant adverse visual effects on the second special landscape quality of the National Scenic Area, as experienced on the gateway section of the B9176 Moray Firth tourist route and at the Struy viewpoint. I do not consider the significant effects to be localised by virtue of compromising the objective to promote and safeguard the NSA's special landscape quality, such that the proposal will constitute the erosion of the NSA's integrity.
Thank you very much. If you wait there, I'm sure Mr. Trinick will have some questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Finlay. I'd mentioned, obviously, a while ago we would try and take a break about 11:30. I'm aware, obviously, we started a little bit later. I'm happy to take soundings on views from parties, Mr. Trinick.
Happy to carry on, sir.
Mr. Finlay? Yeah. All right, let's carry on. So over to you, Mr. Trinick.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Good morning, Mr. Trinick.
Did you receive a rather belated note of the documents I might refer to in cross-examination?
If it's via email this morning, I'm afraid I did not.
Those who did receive the list, there's one more to add, and that's 13.5.1. I'd like you to go first to your inquiry report at paragraph 2.1, where you tell us that the Council's reason for objection is centred around the landscape and visual impacts of the proposed development as a result of its type, location and scale. And then in paragraph 9 of your precognition, you say, well, my main concern regards impacts on the Dornoch Firth NSA, particularly as experienced in the section of the B9176, including point of entry of the NSA and the Struy viewpoint. It's my opinion that significant visual effects not forming part of the objection are still relevant to the assessment, as the impact from the development should be understood in its entirety, so that impacts on the NSA are seen in a proper context. But then finally, in your precognition at paragraph 25, you give a conclusion which relates solely to the NSA. We needn't turn to your report of handling. We know what the reason for objection says, but I want to be clear that the objection of Highland Council is solely related to impacts on the NSA. Is that correct?
Yes, and it will say in paragraph 21 of my precognition, I think it's paragraph 21, but it does say in my precognition that NSA objectives and special landscape qualities are a kind of amalgamation of landscape and visual impacts. So I will try to stay in my own expertise. It does say. Okay.
We're referring to a paragraph in your
Sorry,
precognition.
paragraph 14 in my precognition.
Was that 14 as opposed to 21? I think you referenced 21 a few moments ago.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, no, I'm guilty. I've heard what you said, but you've confirmed that the sole reason for rejection of Highland Council relates to the NSA. That's correct.
That's correct.
Right. You said in chief to Mr. Findlay, you noted that none of the hubs of leg 2 were visible from viewpoint 12, so that lighting would not be seen. But can I again confirm that the lighting which would be necessary for Gavary does not form part of the Highland Council concern about this development?
Now we've focused our objection on the daytime impacts of the development.
Thank you for that. That clarifies it nicely. If you go to your report of handling at paragraph 10, 122, let me know when you're there.
Okay.
We'll return to cumulative effects in more detail later, but the point I want to take up here in a limited way is the last sentence. However, for Gavary, there are no viewpoints from which the development would be experienced singularly, at least theoretically, under scenarios 2 and 3, and therefore there is a cumulative visual impact to consider from all viewpoints.
Okay. Just to clarify, that wouldn't be true for viewpoints. I think it's 2 or 3 or 3 or 4.
You give me the evidence, I'm afraid. I can't help you. I'm not sure it's relevant to my point, because that's not what I'm taking up. I mean, do make your point, that's fine.
Yeah, the viewpoints along the Acheni Glen, like Invershins of Falls area, there wouldn't be a visual impact anymore from Gavary with the as per the amendments of the additional environmental report.
That's fine. Thank you for that. But I'm not really going in that direction. I'm just rehearsing that sentence to you because I think it's clear from the reason for objection and indeed from the evidence put to this inquiry, and I want to get it clear, that cumulative effects of Gavary with projects other than those now in the baseline and leg 2, although not under construction, are not part of the Highland Council case. Your concerns about the effects of Gavary on the existing baseline and leg 2.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yes, of course. In terms of cumulative impacts, it seems clear both from the reason for objection and from the inquiry report and your precognition that the cumulative effects you are concerned with are solely those of Gavary on the existing baseline, otherwise known as the SOLAS effects of Gavary, and on the baseline which includes leg 2, because you make that point clear in your evidence in relation to viewpoint 12. You don't bring in the other wind farms in the consented or prospective baseline.
So there's a focus in my in my cumulative assessment on leg 1 and leg 2, which is the existing and consented baseline, and that's particularly relevant from viewpoint 12.
I think that clarifies it very nicely, and thank you very much. So when in inquiry report paragraph 313, if you go to that.
Can you repeat that, sorry, which report?
Yes, of course. In your inquiry report paragraph 313, You say at the end, consequently, I have judged that the cumulative visual impact effects of Gavary from viewpoint 12 are significant and adverse, and are a determining factor in my assessment of the proposal, that the baseline that you're looking at there is leg 1 and leg 2.
If you can just bear with me one moment. My report's got a little bit confused. And if you could just tell me what paragraph number that is again, please.
Sure. 313 of the inquiry report. It's the last sentence. If you read yourself the last sentence. Yeah. My question was that the baseline relevant to that sentence that's leg 1 and leg 2. Those are the projects about which you're concerned.
Yes, I agree with
Thank you. That's very. Go to your recognition at paragraph 13. And there you say, finally, if I'm going too fast, by the way, just tell me to stop. I don't mind at all. I want to keep up with each other. Are you okay? Thanks. Finally, I do not consider that impacts could be properly described as localised. Along with impacts on VP12, I have agreed to the significant visual effects of the community over 10 kilometres away. That's Achnaean at viewpoint 11. And you also refer to viewpoint, your finding, not Mr. Welch's finding at viewpoint 15. Now, the reason I asked you carefully about the scope of the Council's case is that obviously the word localised now has a policy meaning under policy 11E2 of MPF 4, but it's my understanding that your policy concern in this inquiry is wrapped up in policy 4C in relation to the NSA, that you don't have a broader concern about the localised or other nature of significant effects under policy 11E2. That doesn't appear in your inquiry report at all, does it?
I'd need to double check the inquiry report, but as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't. As far as I remember, but I would need to double check that.
So perhaps I'm not objecting to Mr. Trinix, but his use of the word concern is potentially vague. I can absolutely confirm that whether the effects are localised or not does not form part of Highland Council's objection, but as part of the context against which that objection should be judged, it's a matter that it raises. So and if I can clarify that further, were there to be no NSA objection, the fact that there were more than localised effects would not amount to a reason for objection.
Mr. Trent?
That's very helpful, and in return, I'll give some evidence as well that that's an extremely helpful clarification. So that although Mr. Fitzpatrick rightly gives the reporter full context as well as the objection itself, when the reporter comes to see what the Highland Council objection is, he need not be concerned with policy 11E2, rather with policy 4.
Absolutely. But he will no doubt wish to report on both of them to the ministers.
I understand the reporter has wider concerns in reporting to the ministers, but in terms of the scope of Highland Council's case, I just wanted to narrow that down, and we've agreed it.
Okay, so yeah, I think I understand where you were going from. I think the witness had answered the question, but I'm happy for you to put it to them again if you feel you need to.
So I'm very happy with Mr. Finley as a witness. I'll carry on with him, I think. And I think we've got there. We don't need to go back on it, and I'm grateful for the clarity.
Okay.
That's good. Could you go to the inquiry report, please, again, at paragraph at 10, 100.
Inquiry report.
Sorry, I'm being very stupid. The report of handling, CD42, paragraph 10, 100. Onwards.
Just one moment, sorry.
Sure, of course.
Um, 10.100, did you say? Yeah.
10.100. It's the section which deals with the NSA. And 10.100 for a few paragraphs on to 10.108, that's your section in the report of handling on the NSA. Would I be right to say that you founded the views which you present in those paragraphs on the consultation response of Anne Cowley?
Say that again, sorry, I apologise.
Would I be right to say that you founded your rehearsal of the NSA issue in your report of handling on the basis of the consultation response and no doubt other discussions with Anne Cowley?
Yes, and my own review of the information that was submitted by the applicant.
You say in your inquiry report very clearly at 2.2 and 2.4 that you leave the landscape evidence to Anne Cowley, and that's what we thought you had done when we read your inquiry report. You stuck to that. But then we get your precognition. If you go to paragraph 14, you change tack. You've got a whole section there of your own on the NSA, which goes from paragraph 14 to paragraph 24. And I think, therefore, it's fair for me to, bearing in mind this appeared in the precognition, it didn't appear in your inquiry report, and the precognition is supposed to be a summary of the inquiry report and to respond to points made by other witnesses. Can I be clear that when I come to summarise my view of the evidence in my closing submissions, that I look to Anne Cowling evidence on the NSA? She is your landscape witness. Is that correct?
So my precognition is largely in response to the submission, the landscape and visual impact inquiry report by Mr. James Welch.
Yes. And it's perfectly fair to respond, but the response comes from you, not from Anne Cowling. And I had understood, and I just want some clarity on this, that the landscape witness, the landscape evidence on which I should rely as being that of Highland Council, comes in this case from Anne Cowling as a professional landscape architect.
Okay, I would refer the reporter to paragraph 14 again, where I just make it clear that my understanding of national scenic area special landscape qualities are both visual and landscape impacts, and where they combine to create a special landscape quality as understood by receptors when they're experiencing.
That's an answer, but it doesn't quite answer my point. Sure, you deal with the visual effects on the NSA in terms of viewpoint 12, but actually, you know, you go beyond that in these paragraphs. If you look at paragraph 21 onwards, you give a view on the objectives and overall integrity of the NSA. It seems to be parallel evidence to that of Anne Cowling. I repeat, if I'm looking for the position of Highland Council on this NSA, do I rely on the evidence of Anne Cowling?
I would ask the reporter to review my precognition. If it's any visual impact, you certainly can rely on my evidence, but if you want to rely on any evidence from Anne Cowling, then certainly I wouldn't.
Well, okay. I take your point about the visual evidence, but in terms of the landscape evidence, I rely on the evidence of a professional landscape architect of some great experience, Anne Cowling, when I'm making my submissions. That would be the correct position, wouldn't it?
That would be your position. I wouldn't argue with you with that. I wouldn't argue with you if that's your position. No.
So having got that clear, the reason for doing that wasn't just to have a go at you, it's because I don't want to ask questions about landscape effects on the NSA of you, which I've already done with Anne Cowling, and repeat the exercise. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions in relation to your evidence on the NSA and leave it at that. If you go to paragraph 21 of your precognition. And we are to some extent going over old ground already, because I refer to what you say about this NSA meriting special attention, noting the uniqueness of the designation in the Eastern Highland area. You remember the questions I asked of Anne Cowling on this yesterday?
I would ask for a refresher.
You don't remember them?
No.
Oh, we'll have to go over it. Do you have any advisory source for saying that any one NSA deserves a special attention over another NSA for any reason at all? Do you have any advisory source to tell you that? Please answer my question rather than just giving your view.
No, they're all national designations as far as I know.
There's no rating or ranking of NSAs, is there?
No.
Therefore, I suggest that your statement in paragraph 21 is incorrect. You could not ask the reporter to give more weight to this NSA because of its location. It's an NSA among other NSAs. Is that right?
It's an NSA amongst other NSAs. It is the only one on the east coast of the Highland area.
Well, as a matter of fact, it is. But please just clarify your answer. It is one NSA among other NSAs. It gets no special rating or ranking because of its location.
No, special ranking is because it's a national scenic area.
Turn to paragraph 22 of your precognition. And it may just be a matter of phraseology here, so let's get it clear. You say, I consider it a fact of the assessment that thus far existing and approved development has not diminished or eroded the intactness of the SLQs, etc. Are you asserting that as a general proposition, or is that just your opinion?
I mean, it's my opinion, yes, because but it's my opinion of a fact of the assessment.
All right. It's just language getting in the way. I get your point. Roads. First of all, sir, one trouble I've had, I'm sure I don't know how familiar you are with this area. I've been travelling it for 35 years and I still get incredibly confused between the A numbers of the roads in this area. So I'm going to invite you to have in front of you, not now, when you come to review the evidence and do your site visit. Is that CD 115 or something? Isn't it? It's the AIR of November 22, which is, someone will give me a reference in a moment, please, figure 413B B, which has the ZTV on it, but also has the roads marked in nice red lines with labels saying what the road numbers are. And I think you may find that helpful when conducting your site visit. 115 it is, CD 115.
413B.
Yeah.
So, just to point out, I'm not going to object to Mr. Trinick giving evidence that he's regularly confused about road numbers.
Sorry?
I'm not going to object to you giving evidence that you're regularly confused about road numbers. Me as well.
I have a confusion. It's 836, 839, 837. I get utterly confused.
Very well. I know the figure that you're referring me to, so I've got that in front of me. But you don't want to refer to it.
I don't want to. It's just
okay.
Aid memoir for you when you think which road was he talking about. Might be helpful.
Very well. I'll bear that in mind. Thank you.
Go to your inquiry report, please. At paragraph 3.9. Or rather 3.8.
Could you just advise me which 3.8 that is?
Yeah, I know. I've got that.
There's a 3.8 under the impacts on road and transport users, which is the second one, and that's
second one.
That's what you want.
Yeah. You tell us that AIR assesses the impact on the amenity of the A836, 37, 38, 39, 9176 and the railway line. And in 3.9, you deal with, I want to deal with the A839. I'm not concerned with the A836. So about halfway down, talk about impacts for west and eastbound travellers along the A839 for the section of the route west of Lairg, noting viewpoint 4. However, given the extent that Gavary extends the horizontal spread and will increase the presence density starkness of the array, I've judged that the singular and cumulative effects on road users, that's the A839, to be significant. Now, would you turn to JW1, please? That's CD 12.2, sir. CD 12.2. Do we have a spare anyone? No. With Mr. Finley's permission, could Mr. Welch lend you our paper J1?
Mr. Finley? Okay, yep, I have electronic copies, but...
No, it's for a reporter.
For me?
Have you got one?
Sorry, I've got a little bit lost in the thing.
CD 12.2.
Okay, and you were discussing...
JW1.
Paragraph...
if you just JW1 for the moment.
Yeah.
And if we've got JW2, Mr. Kelly, thank you very much for your help. Yeah.
And this is JW2 that you're passing me just now as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just so I'm afraid...
Give Mr. Finley the opportunity to advise me of whether he has any
I'm very
issues with
happy.
that.
I'm just concerned about the exercise that Mr. Welsh is getting.
Oh. He seems content with that.
Mr. Chillick's concern of yesterday seems to have evaporated today.
Do you want us to have both of these open together at the same time, or just one of them?
Yeah, so the reason for going to paper copies is quite simply that it will be impossible to follow what I'm saying on a screen, and you do need paper copies for this exercise at full scale. Has Mr. Fitzpatrick got JW2 yet? Yeah. Good. Right. Now, referring, if necessary, so you can go to that CD 115 figure if you want, but we can see the A839.
I'm not sure I can see the electronic version for... CD, remind me, what was that? Sorry, CD...
115, figure 413B.
Was that the maps of the roads that we were talking about? Right, 2 seconds.
I can, yeah, let's do that.
Right, so I'll make sure I've got everything open and everybody else that needs everything open. So I've got in front of me a paper copy of JW2, a paper copy of JW1, and I have a paper copy of figure 4.13b, which is the principal visual receptors with blade tip ZTV 20 km, and that's got roads marked on it.
That's what you need. And we're starting with JW1, which is the bare landscape ZTV, and I'm looking at the A839, which starts down at Gulfsby somewhere off the map and comes up past the scoping site at Caled, north of that site, and then heads straight for Lairg. And after Lairg, it goes southwest, and this is where it becomes difficult to follow on the map because of the colouring. It goes down all the way to the junction in the Oikel with the A837. Just make sure you follow me, sir, before I go any further.
That has got me to just southwest of Rose Hall on the map, where there's a joining of two roads.
Yes, that's right, south of Rose Hall. And actually, viewpoint 4 is right on the line of the A839, which gives you a further indicator.
Yeah, I've got that. Have you got
okay.
It?
Now, we're talking about the A839, Mr. Fitzpatrick, west of Lairg. That's the area we're concentrating on. And you said what you've said, and we can note that there is some purple colouring with viewpoint 4 in the middle. And the visibility broadly starts just before Lairg and then continues after until the ZTV colouring peters out in the obvious place. We've been to viewpoint 4 yesterday, and Mr. Welch noted that the young forestry to the south of the road would provide, I don't know how much, but some visual mitigation of the effects of the turbines within 10 years or so. That's what he said. If we look at JW2, and deliberately second because it's even more difficult to follow, we can see viewpoint 4 on JW2, so that locates us, and we can see the word Strathoical south of Rose Hall, broadly where the 837 meets the 839. There's quite a lot of forestry along that route. Between and where the 837 meets the 839, quite a bit of forestry there, isn't there?
Yes, to clarify, that's commercial plantation forestry.
It is, and we will be felling coops, but you don't get clear felling, do you? There are going to be coops felled, which may or may not reveal views of the turbines. We don't know.
It's not my expertise, but as a baseline, the council generally doesn't accept forestry, commercial forestry, as a mitigating factor because.
So, I can't hear what you're saying.
The council doesn't generally accept commercial forestry as a mitigating factor if we're assessing the worst case scenario of a visual impact, then forestry doesn't come into that.
Well, I may be the council's position, but I put to you it's not entirely realistic because with modern forestry practice you don't get massive clear fells which reveal views not previously available. You may get felling of coops, you may or may not get replanting, but can we leave it that there is forestry cover there, some or all of which may be rotated in due course, but the forestry is there. And the reporter can note that on his site visit.
Yes, and also there's at the moment there are a lot of peat restoration projects going on around the Highland where they're restoring forestry to peatland.
I accept that. So just for your site visit, sir, you can perhaps use JW2 as well. At all events, it would appear that the area of viewpoint 4 represents a reasonable worst case for the A839?
I think it's a reasonable viewpoint. It's an entrance point to coming from the sort of like wilder west to the more settled east. There's also a core path there. So I think it's a good choice for a viewpoint. Whether it's, you're asking if it's a worst case scenario viewpoint?
Asking if it's a reasonable worst case for the reporter to have in mind as representing the A839 experience.
Yeah, I've got no reason to dispute that.
Let's turn to the A837, which is the, go to JW1 first of all. So we turn to JW1 again. Yep. We can see that at viewpoint 3, the A836 and A837 divide, or rather the A837 commences, and then it goes northwest through the Oikel, ultimately ending up at Lakimber. I think it goes all that way, some distance away. It meets the A839 as we've seen south of Rose Hall, then going west it becomes the A837 and carries on. Right. In terms of visibility along that road of the development, you say in paragraph 310, Gavary would introduce turbines into sections of eastward views along the lower slopes and valley floors of Strathoical, Kyla Sutherland along the route. It's not much, is it? You've got some visibility north of viewpoint 8, not all the turbines, but of looking at the colouring, a maximum of 6 to 10 turbines. And then you go beyond the junction with the 839, and by that stage anyway, you're well beyond 10 kilometres, and you get to viewpoint 14, which we've spoken about before. That's the extent of the visibility, even on a bare landscape basis, isn't it?
Yeah. As far as I know.
Sorry?
As far as I can read the submission.
If we go to JW2, the only point really to look at is to the south, the west-southwest of viewpoint 14. Sorry, the west-northwest of viewpoint 14, where the A37 does enter some forestry, doesn't it?
Yes. Okay.
So again, for the site visit, I'd suggest fairly limited visibility along the A37 as a whole.
That's what we've assessed. It's not a significant effect along that route.
Also in 3, still talking about your inquiry report, paragraph 310, you need to get out another figure now, my apologies. It's AIR, so CD 124, and we're into not the viewpoints, but the other figures. The figures, it's figure 415D.
Is this the combined ZTV with Achany extension?
No, 415D is the combined ZTV with Cleanside.
I'm sorry, 415D.
Yep.
Delta. Right, sorry. Yep, found that. That's okay. Just give yourself a moment to locate what.
Can you repeat the reference, please?
Yes, of course. It's CD 124, figure 415D. Have you got that?
Cumulative update figures 4 to 21, as it's been in our core documents, yeah, as it's been saved in the...
That's it. So D takes us to the cumulative ZTV as between Gavary and Cleanside. Let me know when you're there. Could we turn the heating off for the moment? Mr. Fitzpatrick, which CD number are you looking at?
CD 124.
That's correct. And within that, it's figure 415D. Are you there?
We're looking at viewpoint 1, is it?
No.
Sorry, I'm afraid I'm not getting this.
My understanding is that we're looking at one of the maps. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I've also realised that for some reason I recorded the wrong CD number as well, which doesn't help at all, and I apologise. I'm told it, actually it's CD 115. Thank you, Mr. Finley. 0 point. Sorry about that.
So it's the same figure that we're looking at. It's just just the CD reference number is a different. Right. So we're CD 1.15, and it is figure 4.15 delta, which is this is where my pronunciations fail. Fiancé cumulative ZTV.
Correct.
Right. Just give Mr. Fitzpatrick a moment to locate that in his material.
Do we have another hard copy of this or not? So hopeless on screen.
Are you having difficulty locating it? It might not be in that folder.
It's 11:37. While we sort this out, it would be a convenient moment.
I think he has the figure in front of him.
What would you like to do? Do you want to take?
I think we'll take a break for.
You want to take a break, Mr. Finley? You're confirmed with that. Yeah. Okay. Well, 11:37 now. Is 10 minutes enough? People want a little bit longer?
15 minutes would be very nice indeed.
Mr. Finley. All right, we'll be slightly more generous then. We'll come back at 5:02, please. How's that? Yeah, okay, right. Let's adjourn for that one. Welcome back, everybody. That's just gone 11:55. Just before the break, Mr. Trunick had taken us to CD 1.15, figure 4.15D. Mr. Fitzpatrick, have you had a chance to locate that now?
I have.
Fantastic, we're in business. Right, Mr. Trunick, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Now, in paragraph 310 of your inquiry report, you say halfway down, given the presence of the Icani-Rosehall cluster and the potential for new schemes in the area, Strathoical Millbuid, Strathtyry and Cleanside. I think there are only 4 projects there, aren't there?
Can you repeat that, sorry?
You say Strath-Oikel and then Oikel and then Millbuid. There's not a separate Oikel project, is there?
I'd need to confirm that, sorry. I wrote that a while ago. It might be an error, but I'm not 100% sure.
That's okay. So we've got those 4 projects you mentioned. You say there will be a tangible benefit for the amenity of the A837, keeping the rounded hills and summits within the LCA south of Lake, free of turbines, south of Lake being where Gavary is. Now, if you go to the figure we've tracked down, dealing first with, therefore, with Cleanside, we can see that it has no visual influence, even theoretical, on the A837 at all, does it?
No, but it does have influence on journeys through the area.
No, not what I'm asking you. I'm asking about the A837, and that's what I'm dealing with in the terms of your evidence. It doesn't have any visual influence on that road. And also for
Sorry, was there an answer coming to that?
Sorry?
Sorry, I was turned away at the point, and I was expecting an answer to be forthcoming, and I might have cut you off midway through the question, so my apologies for that.
Do you agree?
Yeah, it doesn't have any visual influence on the A837.
If you then go to, in the same series of figures, to 415V, you should find a cumulative ZTB as between Gavary and Strathtyry.
I have that.
And again, there's no visual influence from Strathtyry over the A837, is there?
That's correct.
If we go to 415, where is it? T. There we're looking at the cumulative position as between Gavary and Strath-Oikel, which is an in-planning project. Cleanside and Strathtyry are both consented. This is in planning, and we can see very clearly, as you would expect, that the Strath-Oikel does have a theoretical, probably actual, visual influence over the A837, doesn't it?
Yes.
If we finally go to 415P, which is the cumulative position as between Gavary and Millbuid, which is a consented project. Again, as you would probably expect, there is some visual influence over the A37 from Millbuid.
That's correct.
So I'm not quite sure what point you're making in 310. Cleanside and Strathtyry appear to be irrelevant to the issue, and Millbuid and Strath-Oikel already would exert influence over that road.
The point I'm making is that there's sequential impacts, and where there's more wind farms in the landscape, it's important to areas of respite, and they become more important because so much of the landscape is occupied by wind farm developments.
Well, okay, but actually a sequential experience would be made no more extensive by the addition of Gavary, would it, having already looked at JW1 and JW2 and looking at 415T, which is the Strath-Oikel one, and 415P, which is the Millbuid. Gavary just doesn't add to the picture, does it?
It introduces turbines in eastward views, which are forward views when travelling along that route.
Well, if you were travelling east, then clearly Gavary would be straight ahead or slightly to the left, depending on the direction of travel. But you would already be seeing Millbuid and Strath-Oikel more immediately, I suggest, on the right to south side of the road.
That's correct. It would be you would experience them sequentially, so you would move past them.
Excuse me a minute. Yeah. And I think we also have agreement that the effects of Gavary, the visual effects of Gavary at viewpoint 14 are not significant. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Sorry. Turning to the topic of the mitigation applied to Layer 2 and whether or not we undo the mitigation, turn to your inquiry report, please, at 312. Can you put that to one side somewhere? And would you also get out, please, I have in front of you, CD 1351. Are you okay?
Yep, I have them.
Thanks. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am. Yes, got both those.
Thank you. In 312, you tell us that which you've already rehearsed in evidence in chief about the mitigation applied to leg 2 and what Gavary does in contrast to leg 2. I'm not going to rehearse the paragraph. You know what it says, but you end in that way Gavary would undo the mitigation of the consented leg 2 scheme. Now, let me just get, you go to 1351, this is the energy contour layer 2 environmental EIAR, chapter 4, design evolution. You see it?
Are we looking at the map or the actual chapter?
At the chapter. And when you get to the chapter, I'm looking at paragraph 416. Let me know when you're there.
Yeah.
I think this is the design stage at which the mitigation was applied, which led you to find layer 2 acceptable.
As far as I'm aware, this is EIAR, and the leg 2 amendments were made in the second in the redesign submission after this document was submitted.
Well, let's just examine that, because it says, as set out in Figure 4.4, further design iterations were made, etc., etc. Further discussions with the Highland Council confirmed that potential impacts on the landscape had not been fully resolved. As such, additional revisions were made with the changes set out below. And there they are. The design presented within the February 2020 FEI was consented in June 2020 by THC. Am I wrong? Is that not the final leg 2?
That's not the final leg 2
Right.
development.
That's fair enough. I accept that fully. The point I make is that in the documents we've seen to do with leg 2, and we've by no means seen them all, that the mitigation applied was not directed to the NSA, it was directed to more generally achieving mitigation by design.
I don't think it forms part of our core documents. It would be more appropriate to refer to the leg 2 report of handling, I think, but I don't think that forms part. But that's not the final mitigation.
Let's look at the layer 2 report in that case, which is CD 1129. At paragraph 8.126, 8.126. And were you the author of this report?
I was not.
Right, okay. At 826, this is where the author of the report deals with the removal of fifth line turbines 10, 11, 12 and 13. So this is the mitigation to which reference has been made in your evidence, isn't it?
I think so. I need to double check though that this refers to the redesign. It does. It's in the description on the first page. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that.
In the development description on the first page of the report, it's Lake 2 wind farm redesign.
We're on the right one, okay. And so in 8126, there was a discussion relating to the removal of these turbines and what that does to the development. And about 8 lines from the bottom, overall the visual impact was considered to be reduced to a level that was acceptable in terms of visual impact. And so it goes on. At 8143, which is a discussion of the development from the Stewie viewpoint, it refers to the changes that have been secured or have resulted in a reduction of visual effects. There's nothing I see in that report which relates the mitigation which was achieved to impacts on the NSA. Tell me if I'm wrong. I know you weren't the author, so it's probably a very unfair question, but that is my question.
Paragraph 5.9 refers to the landscape officer's response. It says, the landscape officer did not object but raised concerns in relation to the visual and landscape effects, particularly on the Dornoch Firth National Scenic Area and views from the NSA. Overall, the landscape officer considers that the effects on the visual resource are legislated for receptors at several of the viewpoint locations. This also leads to an understatement of the effects on the Dornoch Firth NSA.
Yes, but that doesn't address the issue of the mitigation. My task here is to identify whether the sole concern of Highland Council in relation to Gavary, which is the NSA, was relevant to the changes which were made to the Leg 2 scheme in order to make it acceptable. I don't believe they were.
My understanding is that they formed one of the factors that was for the reasons why they went for a sort amendment, sorry.
Very well. You weren't the author, but I accept your answer as that's your understanding. I can't go further than that. But more generally, the mitigation that was secured for Leg 2 was secured for that project to make that project acceptable. That's correct?
Yes.
Gavary wasn't in the picture, wasn't in mind in terms of the mitigation that was achieved. It was irrelevant to that mitigation.
They weren't, but my colleague wasn't assessing Gavary. It was in the cumulative picture at the scoping stage. I remember that clearly. But they could only secure the mitigation for the project that they were.
I fully understand that. My point is, and I think it's such an obvious one, I hardly need put it, is that the officer who was assessing Leg 2 didn't say to himself, I need to do this to Leg 2 in order to, because it's relevant to Gavary. The relevance was simply to the project being assessed, Leg 2.
Of course.
And Gavary being a totally separate project to be judged on its own merits, that's a trite comment, we know that's the case, and to be assessed as a whole. The key issue for this inquiry, I suggest, has nothing to do with the question of the Layer 2 mitigation. It's a totally separate issue.
I remember Mr. Trinity saying yesterday that Gavary is in effect an extension to Leg 2, and I make reference in my precognition that how it will, and also in my report of handling, is how it will combine with Leg 2 is a very important factor in my assessment.
Yes, but you're going to do it the other way around, aren't you? It may not mean Mr. Welch may have said that. I wasn't giving evidence yesterday, even if I am today, but it was just Mr. Welch saying that. Yes, of course we see Gavary as an extension to Layer 2, but the mitigation that was achieved for Layer 2 was for the purposes of making Layer 2 acceptable. Layer 2 is now consented. It's the baseline. We now look at adding Gavary to that baseline. We look at the merits of Gavary on its own merits. The fact that mitigation was achieved for Layer 2, I suggest, is irrelevant to the consideration of Gavary.
I would agree to disagree on that point.
Have your evidence and we'll submit on that basis. Thank you. We go to, hold on, your inquiry report at 4.1.
Give me 1 second, I think my report's on the floor.
Whoops.
Glad it wasn't me making that noise.
Sorry. So we're having document control issues here.
Yes, that's not a problem. Just everyone just takes their time just to find what they need. That's not a problem.
Thank you. So,
I was just saying, if everyone takes their time to find what they need, it's not a problem. That's okay.
I'm afraid there's no option, so I'm going to have to take the time. I'll be with you in a moment. This is the final version. I'll try and do it without documents. You say in your inquiry report in 4.1, it's the second 4.1, you respectfully submit it is not appropriate to include the Cayley wind farm with the assessment of cumulative effects, given there is as yet no application for the scheme. In fact, it was agreed, wasn't it, with Highland Council in fact at the request of Highland Council, that Acadia would be included in the AIR for the purpose of the assessment. That's correct, isn't it?
High level, yeah, so that we could have a high level understanding of the cumulative picture, yes.
You say it's not appropriate, but actually it was agreed that it would be included, so we can agree that, can't we?
I would agree to that it's not appropriate to assess Acadia through this wind farm, so we can't make any value judgment on that, the merits of that case.
No, sorry, we're not assessing Acadia, we agree that. Your statement is it's not appropriate to include it within the assessment of cumulative effects. That was done at your request, and we included Acadia in the baseline.
I mean, if that's what it says, that's what it says, yeah. But I can't make a value judgment on the significance of Acadia because that would prejudice my, if that was to come to me as a case in the future. So that's...
We're not in our territory.
Thank you.
Now, I also want to look at, because although localised effects in terms of policy 11 are not between us, the reporter nevertheless has to look at those issues in reporting to the ministers, and I don't know what importance is going to attach to them. Therefore, I have to look at what you say in your evidence about it, and which you very fairly say. I'm not criticising you for putting it in your evidence. And you tackle localised effects at various points in your precognition. For reference, we needn't go there, paragraphs 13, 20 and 25. So I want to understand, and we'll revisit this probably in the hearing session on policy, but it's in your evidence, so I'm going to cross-examine you, and what meaning you attach to the word localised in terms of policy 11E2, noting that Mr. Welch has dealt with the matter in some detail in his inquiry report.
I mean, can I just confirm with you that we're discussing significant localised and significant non-localised effects?
Yes, we are, and that's a fair question. I'm talking about the wording of policy 11E2, which is significant localised effects, or significant effects which are localised, whichever the wording is.
I mean, taken on a case-by-case, viewpoint-by-viewpoint, taken on a case-by-case, viewpoint-by-viewpoint basis. Certainly for viewpoints 13 and viewpoint 11, it comes down to the exposure of the turbines, the proportion of turbine towers that are in view from a distance, whether the composition, issues with the composition of the array are evident from a distance, and this may be, uneven gaps, uneven groupings, visual clutter caused by stacking, things like that. These are large new elements that are going into the landscape and moving elements. So things like that will be very notable and noticeable from some distance. I don't consider the term localised to be relative to the height, size, scale of the development. I consider that the term or non-localised as well is really the impacts as experienced from where they are experienced. So if we're looking for criteria for non-localised effects, I think that that's just really going to depend on. Certainly, I think it's probably easier if I do. If we're looking for criteria for non-localised effects, for the term non-localised, it comes down to consideration of the distance, maybe the number and of receptors from those distances. It's really not a settled term by any account. I would say it's not one that we've given so much weight to in the past. It's always been there. So it's something that we've really got to give due consideration to going forward. But I don't know, I'm probably going off on one now. So if you want to...
Yeah, we're both struggling a bit, and I haven't got an absolute answer. But in terms of the factors you look at to determine whether or not, in terms of that policy, an effect can be a significant effect can be described as localised, I think we agree that one of the factors is distance.
Yeah.
We certainly agree with that. Could we also agree that you have to take into account the type of landscape that you're talking about, in the sense that, say, in a barer landscape, scarp and valley, hill and dale, you're going to get naturally longer distance views than you would get in perhaps an undulating or a flat landscape?
Yes, so there's more opportunity for significant effects in those kind of receptors, yes.
So we have to factor in the type of landscape you're looking at, the topography. Would you also factor in expectations, reasonable expectations based on the scale of the development and the height of the turbine?
I think that's bringing in a kind of relative term, and I would resist that, I would say. And the reason is, I mean, a shed in the back garden.
Sorry, am I missing?
I would resist that. I would resist that kind of terminology for localised, because I think it's making it relative to the size of the development, and I don't think that comes into it. That's not how I would consider it. A 180-metre turbine is more likely to have non-localised effects than a shed in a back garden, for example.
Um, 24, should we say. There can be an expectation that you are going to expect significant visual effects, probably further than you would for a development of two turbines. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I would agree, yes, and I'd certainly put that in my original report, that I was surprised by the lack of significant effects that the assessor had found then, because it was a application for 47 turbines of the same height. So yes, there is an expectation of significant effects over a wider area, yes, but I don't think that that's well, I think it's a nuanced point, and also I don't want to go into really the wording and terminology of MPF 4 at this stage. It is what we're working with.
It is, but the reporter's got to report to the ministers on whether or not he finds that the effects of this development are localised, quite apart from the key issue between the council and the applicant. So I just wanted to get your views on that. We can follow up the views in the hearing session, and no doubt we will. But what I'm driving to, in the context of what separates us in this case, is that I'd suggest you don't take into account a landscape designation. That is a different issue altogether. That comes under policy 4. And you don't look at the word localised in terms of designations.
I would take issue with that stance as well, because it's a national designation.
In policy 11E2, the word localised is used simply concerning significant landscape and visual, can't remember, effects anyway. Policy 4 concerns designations. My suggestion to you, and if we disagree, we can, but is that actually the fact of the NSA is not relevant to considering whether or not effects are localised. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I would agree to disagree with that. I would agree to disagree with that.
Finally, with regard to what you say in your precognition at paragraph 13, no need to go there, I can just rehearse it. This is where you say, I don't consider effects could be properly described as localised, along with impacts on BP12 without regard to agreed significant effects to community 10 kilometres away, that's BP11, and there's your finding, which we don't accept for the National Cycle Route 1 at 15. if we were, I'll tell you what, even better, take up your inquiry report and go to table 3.1, starting on internal page 8. And I'm looking here at the applicant's assessment of significant effects at viewpoints. We can see the whole of the first page is down to viewpoint 7, significant. Viewpoint 8 and 9 we disagree about. 10, not significant. 11, significant. But one point not recorded there, no reason you should, because it's not a cumulative point, is that you know that Mr. Welch says that with the addition of layer 2 to the baseline as constructed, viewpoint 11 would not be significant. You know he says that.
Yes.
So if you abstract viewpoint 11 from the discussion of how far do visual effects, significant visual effects project, the next one would be viewpoint 7, wouldn't it, at 5.89 kilometres. That's Mr. Welch's outermost finding of a significant visual effect, apart from viewpoint 11.
Correct, yeah.
And we know that layer 2 is going through its pre-commencement condition, suspensive condition purification, and if the reporter therefore accepts Mr. Welch's evidence, then the geographic extent of significant visual effects from this development will go out to 5.89 kilometres.
If the reporter accepts that, yes.
I know you don't accept the evidence, it's just on Mr. Welch's evidence. Now, I've got a heading in my notes that says, turn to look at viewpoints. I've abbreviated this quite a lot because we know exactly where we differ, and I'm not going to persuade you that your view should be changed. So, for example, for viewpoint 12, which is our primary concern, you say major impact, magnitude medium high. We say this is an over-assessment of 14 kilometres, noting the very small percentage of the available view that will be taken up. If I were to ask you questions, you would stick to your evidence and we would stick to ours, and that's as far as it goes, and I can't help further in cross-examination, so I won't try. But I'd like you to go to viewpoint 12 within the Highland Council visualisations. So that's figure 33A in CD 1.24.
I'm ready.
Thanks very much. I don't know. It may be the reporter is very familiar with the Highland Council visualisation approach, but if he is, my apologies for going through this basic stuff. But if you look at the figure 33A, we can see some view cones, can't we? And I think 27 degrees is the view cone for the 75 millimetre montage. That's correct, isn't it?
I wouldn't be able to confirm that. That's not my expertise. It usually says on that visualization extent of 75 millimeter. It usually says on the visualization whether it's the extent to the 75 millimeter or the extent to the 50 millimeter. It doesn't appear to do that on these.
Well, if you go to figure the Highland Council, the last image in that set, you've got the Highland Council visualisation, which is at 75 millimetres.
It stands to reason that that would be the narrowest.
And it is the narrowest one at 27 degrees. So what the reporter, I'm sure you agree, needs to bear in mind is that whether or not what you see at 75 millimetres at any distance you could possibly hold it at represents what the human eye sees. We're never going to agree on that. But what we can agree on is that when the reporter sits at his desk, as opposed to going into the field, he has to bear in mind that he's looking at 27 degrees out of a 270 degree available view. That's correct, as a matter of fact.
You wouldn't be doing your job if you didn't. Yes, I can agree with that.
So whatever the merits of the Highland Council visualisation approach, and I'm not going to debate that here, the reporter must be very careful to look out for context when he looks at that narrow a view cone. Correct?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
When the reporter, as he inevitably will, finishes site visits and goes back to his desk and writes his report, he has to be very aware that what he is looking at here is a mere 27 degrees of the available view and not miss the context.
I wouldn't describe it as mere, but yes, in principle, yes.
To go to viewpoint 13 in CD 124, and that's the nature scope visualizations, please. It'd be useful to have alongside you as well your inquiry report at table 3.1 again. So on internal page 10. Now the reason I'm going here and then to some other viewpoints is to just carry out a calibration exercise, see what I think of your calibration in terms of effects at different distances. So we look at the wire line or look at whatever you want, but let's look at the photomontage actually at viewpoint 13. And that's at a distance of 15.25 K. That's figure 16F. Just make a mental photograph of that image. You assess that as being major, moderate, and significant. Good to get another source just a moment. Maybe more helpful. Let's have a look. What I'm looking for is your finding of magnitude, which I find actually in your report of handling. You assess a median magnitude of change at this viewpoint of 15.25 kilometres. I'm not asking you to change your mind, just recording it. Let's now leave that open to its fullest extent so you can go back to it, and then go to viewpoint 1, please.
Is that the nature Scott version of viewpoint 1?
Sorry?
Is that your nature Scott? Oh, yes, that's the nature Scott versions. Yes. Okay.
And here we are at a distance of 1.81 kilometres from the development. And we can look at the photomontage image on this A36 lay-by. And you find a medium-high magnitude of change. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
1.81 kilometres. If you go to viewpoint 4, my apologies, I can't see anything from viewpoint 2. Viewpoint 4, this is at a distance of 4.3 kilometres, and you find a medium-high magnitude of change. So if you look at the photomontage, just for the purpose of this exercise, that's a medium-high magnitude of change. If I'm going too far, stop me. If you then go to viewpoint 5, which is at the distance of 4.59 kilometres, and look at the photomontage again, you find a medium-high magnitude of change. Just looking at the photomontage in passing. If you then go on to viewpoint 6, the distance is increasing a bit. We're at 4.71 kilometres. And again, you find a medium-high magnitude of change that we can glimpse at the photomontage before passing on. And finally, as part of this exercise, I go to viewpoint 7, which is at 5.89 kilometres, and where again you find a medium-high magnitude of change. And you can look at the photomontage. Now, against that background, would you turn to CD 118? And there are a lot of appendices in 118. I'm looking at Technical Appendix 4.1. It's the Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment methodology. At paragraph 714. Now, do you broadly adopt the open methodology when making your own assessment of effects? So we're comparing like with like.
What paragraph are we looking at, sorry?
714. My question was rather more general. When you're assessing the level of effects, you're using the same terminology as open, but do I gather that you broadly use their methodology?
Broadly, yes.
So in 714 we have a description of what certain levels of change mean. And high, major alteration to the baseline view, prevailing influence, introducing elements substantially uncharacteristic in the landscape, in the view rather, medium, moderate alteration to baseline view, readily apparent, introducing elements that may be prominent but not necessarily uncharacteristic. So for the viewpoints to which I drew your attention, except for viewpoint 13, you find a medium-high effect at a distance between 1.81 kilometres out to 5.89 kilometres, and going all the way out to 15.5 kilometres, you've only dropped half a notch. That seems to me very odd. How could the magnitude of change not differ very materially, and certainly by more than half a notch, between 5 kilometres and 15 kilometres, even taking account of all relevant factors? I don't think it stands up. What's your response?
Magnitude of change is not a function of distance alone. Magnitude of change is not a function of distance alone. And I've taken account of the size and scale of the development, the geographical extent, not just the field of view, but also the perceptual width of the array. There's factors coming into this like composition, and that can have a big perceptual view. So generally where I've gone medium-high, I've considered either it's more than a moderate alteration to the baseline view, or that it has introduced elements that may be prominent but not necessarily uncharacteristic in the view. They might, the change might be a bit more uncharacteristic of the view. I think I mentioned this earlier, that the terminology uncharacteristic or characteristic in and of changes the kind of meaning there. And I would, my own assessment, I would certainly go for uncharacteristic of the view over in the view. So my assessment is as it is.
Okay, and that's a very thoughtful reply, and I thank you for it. But I just have to put you as a final point that looking at the images and taking account of all the factors you mentioned, looking at those photo montages between 1.181 and 5.89 kilometres, and then looking at, again at viewpoint 13, I have to suggest your calibration is out here, that it just doesn't stack up to have that minor level of magnitude difference as between those substantial, as between 5 kilometres and 15. It doesn't stack up, but you won't disagree. You've given me your answer, and that's for the reporter to note. So are you happy to leave that point there, or do you want to say more?
I don't think I have any more to add to that.
Thank you.
It's all explained in the report and in the appendix.
Thank you for that. Turning now finally, I think we'll finish by one, to the issue of cumulative effects. If you go to section 4 of your inquiry report and to table 1, so table 4.1, apologies. Could you also have in front of you the second appendix to your report of handling? Starting at internal page 59. Now again, much of this exercise is to inform the reporter so that he can form a rounded opinion when reporting to the ministers. It doesn't necessarily reflect the differences represented by the reason for rejection between the council and the applicant. So against that background, do you have those documents in front of you?
Did you say the report of handling? Which
appendix 2, internal page 59.
Appendix 2, yes, I have it here.
Now, on page 59, you note 4 cumulative scenarios at the top of the page, being those which are actually set out for the reporter's note only in paragraph 8.4 of CD 114. So you replicate what Open say there about the scenarios they look at. And you know, and you've recorded, that Open assessed the cumulative effects of the development on each of the baseline scenarios separately. Your assessment comes to a single conclusion on cumulative effects without differentiating between scenarios. As a matter of fact, that is correct, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I confirmed before. It focuses on consented and constructed schemes.
Consented and constructed, so scenarios 1 and 2. But nevertheless, you reach a single conclusion for those two scenarios. You don't differentiate.
As you said before, that forms the baseline, so it's the best to the baseline that we have, so yeah.
So I say again, I'm missing what you're saying.
Yeah, it forms the baseline, the nearest to the baseline as we understand it when we're assessing the application.
Sorry, my apologies. Are you not hearing the answers? Okay. All right. There's a volume button on the mic which you might just on the left, which might assist for the speaker.
Yes.
David's just going to. Hopefully that should. Is that any louder, or I don't know if it controls the volume you speak at. That speaker there picks up.
Do you want to say testing or something?
Can everyone hear me?
Okay. I just have my apologies for the interruption, but could you just clarify again your answer to Mr. Trunick? You appeared to be saying that your consideration of cumulative effects was based on scenarios 1 and 2. Did I understand that properly?
It was focused on scenarios 1 and 2, yes.
So when I see for viewpoint 1, for example, you've got a heading of combined development, and for Open you record scenarios 1, 2, 3 and 4. Your medium-high conclusion is simply about scenarios 1 and 2. Is that right?
Sorry, which viewpoint are you referring to?
That's what you're referring to. I've referred you to viewpoint 1 under the heading of combined development, where you record Open's conclusions, the magnitude for scenarios 1, 2, 3 and 4, but your conclusion simply says medium-high. So naturally I'm thinking, well, what scenario are you looking at here? And I think your answer has been a combination of 1 and 2.
Yes, it's scenario 2 because that's the base. That's the existing and the consented.
So you do not look in your cumulative assessment. You do not look at in-planning schemes at all.
That's fleshed out in the body of the report and also in the.
I'd just like an answer. Do you look at in-planning projects in your cumulative assessment?
Yes, I do, and it's fleshed out in the body of the report.
Yeah.
And in the.
I think you're missing the point of my question, which is trying to get some clarity as to what you do. Because looking at viewpoint 1, and can we have some clarity now, please? You simply record medium-high, so we don't know from what you say which scenarios you're looking at. You said in answer to an earlier question that your focus was on scenarios 1 and 2. So my next question is, so when I see medium-high, is that Gavary on the scenario 1 and 2 baseline alone, or does it go beyond that? Please simply answer that question.
It's scenario 2.
So going back to where I left off, where we had to backtrack, in that conclusion, medium-high, you do not take account of scenario 3 or 4.
No, the focus is scenario 2.
The heading of that table is combined development. And this may or may not be a fundamental question in terms of comparing like with like. It's my understanding from various points in your report and in your analysis of viewpoints is that you are looking at the combined effects of all the developments in a given scenario. You're not looking at the additional or incremental effects of Gavary on a given baseline. Do you understand my question before you answer it?
Just to clarify, the combined development term on the table, that's just what's used in our template for that table. So we will look at that when we go back. If I would prefer if you could clarify what you mean by combined effects and additional effects, just so I can make sure I give as full an answer as possible.
Well, let me ask you, do you understand the difference between combined effects and additional effects? Yes or no?
In general, yes.
I wasn't asking in general. I asked a question whether you understood in terms of visual impact assessment on a cumulative basis the difference between combined effects and additional effects. Do you understand the difference?
My understanding is that combined effects are the total effects from all of the wind farms that are assessed as a whole, and that additional effects are those effects that result from the implemental changes to the application that's being assessed. You'll note in my response and my assessment that there's a limit to that, and that limit is generally with those applications that have been approved and consented and are already in place. In general, but it's fleshed out in the body of the report.
Going beyond my question, I already understood the scenarios you're looking at, scenarios 1 and 2. You don't look at 3 and 4 in the conclusions you draw. But my suggestion to you is I don't think you look at the incremental effects of Gavary on the baseline. You're looking at the combined effects, the total effects of the development when Gavary is put into the picture.
So is that the combined effect, as you described it?
I'll put the question one more time. Having now secured a common understanding of what combined effects or total effects mean and what incremental or additional effects means, my suggestion to you is that you are looking at the combined effects or the total effects of development in your cumulative assessment, not at the additional or incremental effects. Am I right? A clear answer, please.
I mean, to me, they're very similar things. It's difficult to take one from the other.
You really think that?
It's an additional effect from Gavary results in a combined, and it's part of my assessment to consider them both.
Well, that is rather disappointing, I have to say. I mean, you do not see that, you do not understand the important difference there is between looking at a development on a given baseline and saying what is the additional effect that arises because of adding this into the baseline, and on the other hand, as a completely separate assessment, saying what is the total effect of the development picture with this development in that baseline. Do you not see the difference?
I do, and I consider them both to be quite important considerations when you're assessing the impact of the development.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, but it's not much help to me just to hear you say that. I need to know what you've done in your assessment, and my suggestion to you, which I'll make for the third time, and I really do expect a clear answer now, please, is that you have looked simply at the combined effects, the total effects of the development. You have not looked at the incremental or additional effects of the development. Am I right or am I wrong?
I won't dispute that.
Okay, I have an answer to the question. So it was a topic you took an interest in earlier on, and I hope you've got the information you need from that, but it was to provide you with that information. I went through that exercise. And that concludes my cross-examination. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trinick. We are at 5-1 just now. I have a couple of questions that I'll want to ask, and then it would be Mr. Finley's turn. Again, I'm not going to ask you to name the exact number of minutes you're going for, but you can anticipate my question is, do people want to break now?
I would suggest we go ahead. I have 5 to 10 minutes at most.
Okay. So you're content to proceed, and you think we'll be finished before perhaps 1:30, something like that? Mr. Trinick, any views from you? Yeah, you're happy. Okay, let's crack on then. Just bear with me a moment. A number of the points I wanted to discuss have already been covered either in cross-examination or in chief, so just need to... Okay, I actually think I've only got one question left over because the remainder of them have been covered in one way, shape or form. It's probably quite a quick one. Appendix 2 of your report of handling, obviously you've just been on that, so I think you may still have it in front of you, appears to state that the Council agrees with the applicant's findings for VP4. So if we can just, that I think is on the second page. So for VP4, it says app medium high in the first column, and underneath it says THC medium high. And if I can just take you to paragraph 1.10 in the report of handling. I need to find that myself, so just give me a moment. It's hidden under many maps and papers. And in that you appear to ask for a position of high to be found. And it might be a typing error, something as simple as that. I was just wanting to clarify which of those two statements, is it Appendix 2 that's correct, is it the paragraph that's correct, or have I misread it?
I'm sorry, I lost the paragraph.
Yeah, paragraph 10.110. And in there you cover a number of different viewpoints. It might be easier to go from the bottom up. I'm going about a third of the way up from the bottom. And the sentence starts, otherwise the sensitivity of visual receptors set out in air is accepted, noting that for viewpoint 4, A839 between Legg and Rose Hall, the Council has reassessed the sensitivity of the receptor as high to take account of core paths and recreational activities in the area. But if I then go to the corresponding part of Appendix 2, which we were just on a second ago, next to viewpoint 4, you write in there medium high, and I wasn't sure what I should have expected to see high in there given what you just said in the paragraph. I'm content if it's a typing error, but I wanted to clarify, and then which of the two should I actually take to be correct?
I think it's medium high is the correct sensitivity.
So in that instance, so from my clarity, what it says in Appendix 2 is that you agree with the applicant's assessment of the medium-high sensitivity, and therefore I should treat what's written in paragraph 10.110, where it asks for high, to be a typing error.
Yes, please do.
That's clear, thank you. That's the only additional questions I had. Mr. Finlay, over to you.
Thank you. It's just you were asked a number of questions by Mr. Trinick about the Leg 2 report, and if you could go back to that, I think it is CD. The committee 1129 is the committee report. Yes, thank you. And if you go, try and lead you through some of the more obvious parts. If you go to page 2 of 111.
I just need to reopen it if I could just have 1 second.
Tell me when you've got that.
CD 11448, isn't it?
No.
Sorry.
1129, I think it was. Yep.
Mr. Finlay, can we do paragraph numbers rather than pages? So,
yeah, of course. But I'll wait until we're there. Paragraph 1.1, electronic page 2. This is just setting out what the development is. Paragraph 1.1 sets out the number of turbines. Paragraph 1.2 sets out, if you like, the planning history, the original report in June 2020, where members agreed to the planning permission subject to conditions. And I believe that ties in with the EIA report CD 13.5 Roman numeral 1, which ends in 417, says the design presented within the February 2020 FEI was consented in June by THC. So by that stage, the original application had been reduced by 4 turbines.
Correct.
You can see what the current proposal, it's been amended to take into account new advances in wind energy, which includes increasing the height of the turbines and increasing the blade length. So what this report was primarily concerned with was the same number of turbines, and as I understand it, broadly the same locations, but with increased heights and blade lengths.
Yes.
Thank you. And then you drew attention in paragraph 5.9 to the landscape officer's input. And just to, we do have that before the inquiry at CD 1148, so I can ask you to turn to that.
Okay, I have that.
And so if you look at the first page, this was we'll see at the end. It's the planning officer is Claire Farmer, the landscape officer was Anne Cowling. There's one can see on the first page. She even at that stage is indicating concern about the NSA. I won't ask you to read through that. If you turn down to electronic page 4, you will also see her concerns about the NSA in terms of viewpoint 12.
Yes.
That's just background, but if we can come back to the report, you were, I think, taken to, I can't remember which paragraph, 8143, but can I take you to 8107 to begin with? one can see in 8107 it was anticipated the scheme would have significant impacts on the Dornoch Firth NSA. Reference to theoretical visibility from viewpoint 12. Continued description of it. Then, 8108, whilst the previous application had limited visibility from viewpoint 12, it was considered the new proposal would increase the effects on the NSA, and improvements were sought through negotiations with the applicant. The FEI scheme in front of members for determination presents an amended scheme which reduces the hub heights of 6 turbines and height to blade tip of turbine 5 has been reduced from 200 metres to 190 metres. This has resulted in the reduction of the prominence of the development. What's your understanding as to the reason why those reductions were sought?
Just to bring the impacts on the NSA as experienced at viewpoint 12 to within acceptable levels, visually and in special landscape quality terms.
And it then goes on to say the main concern was an increase in aviation lighting. The applicant presented an amended scheme, etc., reducing hub heights. Given that visibility will be limited and whilst there may be some adverse effects, it's not considered there is a nature and a scale which make the proposed development unacceptable in terms of the special qualities of the NSA. And is that your understanding of the view of Claire Farmer in writing this report?
Yes.
So we then go on to the paragraph to which you were taken to, which you were taken to paragraph 126, 8126, which records reduction in heights and also records turbines, the turbines 10, 11 and 12 being removed. And then if we go on in the document to paragraph 8143 to viewpoint 12, there's again reference to the NSA in the second line, but if we go 5 or 6 lines down, the proposed development would viewed from the existing leg 1 turbines, only the blade lengths and tips would be visible. This has resulted in the proposed development appearing inferior to the landscape, as it would be contained between landforms and viewed from approximately 17 kilometres. The changes to the design that have been secured have resulted in a reduction in visual effects. Again, what was your understanding as to why the changes to design were secured?
For the same reasons, just to ensure that any impacts on the national scenic area, the special landscape quality and visual impacts would be within acceptable limits.
And then if we, comparing that to this scheme, would the proposed development appear inferior in the landscape in the way that that scheme was considered to be?
No. It would unduly undo all that mitigation, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes that part of the process. Mr. Fitzpatrick, you can stand down. That brings us to the end of the landscape and visual inquiry session. So in a moment I'll close for today. Tomorrow we will be holding our hearing statements into hearing statements. Let's try that again. We'll be holding our hearing sessions into policy and into draft conditions. Agendas have been circulated for that. My proposal would have been to start tomorrow at 10 a.m. again. Check whether that's acceptable to parties. Anything on that before we close, Mr. Finlay first, and then Mr. Trinick after? No, nothing, Mr. Trinick.
So only this, that given that noise is no longer an issue, we'll be presumably dealing with policy first and conditions second.
Yes. I think the original reason for dealing with noise first had been a request previously, but quite right, yes, following discussions yesterday. It will be policy first, and then we'll move on to conditions afterwards. I can't give you an estimate on time. We'll take as long as we take, and if we need to use Thursday, we will, although on the basis of what we've got on the agenda and what people have said, I suspect tomorrow will be sufficient. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I'll close for today. Thank you, everybody, and 10 a.m. tomorrow.